Welcome and good morning. My name's Eden. I'm here with my dear friends, Brandon and Dave. You know the drill. This is Generation on the Rise, where we go there. We have a topic every week where we sort of kick it around, talk about it. You know, what we say, cozy up to the bar stool. But this morning, my bar stool's full of coffee here in front of me. I'm sure the same is true for you too. And we're going to go there. So today, we're going to talk about shaping your team, which I think is going to be super interesting. The three of us have worked in a few different places, different sizes too. We're going to talk about different roles on your team, things you need, things maybe you don't need, how you shape them. I think it's going to get into the details here. I won't be the first one to say it, but someone at some point is going to say, well, this role in one organization is going to be different in another organization. I think that's the type of go there that we see. So shaping your team, here we go. Brandon, first question to you. Shaping your team, what's a role you must have anywhere you go, or maybe a role you've always had in the different places that you've been?
Unpinning that pin that we just put in on earlier, HR director, right? I've worked for 3 different municipalities and only 2 have had HR directors. The township that I worked for did not have a designated HR director. And boy, was that fun.
But what did that mean? You still had to do HR, right? So who did it?
It was more of a divide and conquer between myself and the manager.
Okay.
Which on top of everything else,
yeah,
we did HR stuff.
And you were the assistant manager there?
Yep. So, it was interesting because we ran the hirings, right? For the most part, it was a relatively small team. So it was either the manager or myself running almost every recruitment minus, I think we let the public works folks do the laborers, but.
How many employees did that organization have?
Including police?
Collective bargaining?
2 unions, police and public works.
Okay. All right, Dave, what about you?
Well, I got to agree with Brandon. I think human resources is such a nuanced discipline. You really do need to have somebody who has a full understanding of everything that's going on in your municipality. But I would say a close second, if not an even tie, is your chief of police. A good chief of police can make your life as a manager much easier. Right now, I'm in a borough which has a police department that reports up to the mayor. So it's a traditional borough arrangement, which adds an element of critical importance to having a chief who really, and thankfully there is one there, who can guide that community, who understands law enforcement, the importance of community policing, the pitfalls of labor relations. It's a broad brush you need to paint with if you're the chief of police in a law enforcement agency in Pennsylvania and around the country, especially in 2025. Having that good leadership in your law enforcement can make you sleep a lot easier at night.
Can I just say, I've always been fascinated, not in a positive or negative way, just intrigued by how that works with boroughs, right? Like you have an executive level department head, in this case, chief of police, who doesn't report to the manager. They report to the mayor.
Yeah.
I've seen that work out and I've seen that not work out.
The reality is, for those of our listeners who aren't from Pennsylvania, the jurisdictions here beneath the state and county level are controlled by state codes. So there's the borough code, second class township code, first class township code, third class city code. And those were written a long time ago. They've been modestly updated over the years, but the majority of the Commonwealth is not professionally managed. Here in Southeast Pennsylvania, around Center County, around Pittsburgh, you see more professional managers, ICMA managers in those communities where there's more people in the Commonwealth living there. My township has 46,000 people in it. Brandon, I think you're a little larger than me.
63.
63, yeah. Some of these small towns, 800 people, 1,900 people, 4,000 people, the code was really written for them. And they never, while the codes allow for a manager, they never really contemplated municipal management the way the three of us have this as a career and the way many, if not all of our listeners contemplate it. Those codes were delegating authority to the elected officials who they assumed would fill that role. There are still townships and boroughs in the Commonwealth where the elected officials plow the roads and cut the grass. They basically work in public works. So I think that's the reason that's there. But I think if we were designing a professional municipality, we would certainly not be having department heads report to elected officials beyond the CAO.
Yeah, we're a little draconian.
I'll add an interesting caveat. The codes, for those outside of the wonderful Commonwealth, we have the township code, but we also have this little fun provision called the Home Rule Charter.
Oh, yeah.
That if your community decides they don't want to live by any of those rules, they can essentially write their own. They get to write their own laws.
If your charter committee does a professional job, you can get additional taxing options. You can have additional revenue sources. Lower Merion is not home rule, right?
No,
No,
no.
we
We
have
are a
Westchester,
first-class township
Carlisle,
by
they're all home rule.
Norristown,
Yep,
where I used to work.
Norristown.
Their mayor back in the 80s was arrested, FBI seizure. Fun story, Google it if you're ever interested. When the mayor was arrested, they did the home rule charter. They went from being a borough to a home rule municipality, which is their formal name. In the charter, they wrote that all department directors report to the council, and the council does the hiring of all department directors, which was you had your building and planning director, your public works director, chief of police, and finance director. They report to the manager, and that's how it functioned. But at the end of the day, the council does the hiring and firing.
And I think that's where going through the charter process and creating a home rule community where you can really write good regulations can go wrong. I mean, it would be a huge uplift for the community to change that in the future. The problem that we have is the communities generally don't understand how their local government functions, what we're responsible for, are charged with providing services. Fun fact in Pennsylvania, providing police services is optional. It is not required in any municipal code. In the Commonwealth, where providing fire services and EMS, ALS, and BLS is required. Yet across the Commonwealth, we have well-built police departments everywhere, but the fire services and EMS are struggling for funding. They haven't transitioned to a career where there's dwindling volunteers. And communities say, I need more cops because of public safety. Okay, what happens if your house catches on fire? That's a huge issue in the Commonwealth that I've been dealing with for a long time and trying to educate communities about the importance of investing in all of public safety. Don't even get me started about emergency management. Now you have this government that is not set up in the way that the council manager form of government contemplates. How do you get that change? And I think we as professional managers would argue that it needs to change. If the CAO is trying to make some sort of strategic decision that impacts public works and the public works director disagrees with it, well, in that community where they report to the council, they're going to the council. So you could have 10 departments going in 10 different directions. Huge problem. So let me.
It is an interesting disconnect. So I just want to add one piece to that. I think you're right, Eden. There does seem to be a misunderstanding maybe out there that by taking the authority to hire fire out of the hands of the elected officials and placing it under the discretion of the manager or administrator, you are creating an environment of patronage or nepotism, when it really is, at least through our lens. I managed in a community that just before I started there, I won't name names, they had removed from the manager's ordinance the higher fire authority. I don't think at the time they realized that in doing so, it was tantamount to changing the form of government from council manager to general management. When I pressed on the issue a little bit to some of the leadership on my board, their response was, yeah, we did that because some of the elected officials were concerned that by allowing the manager to do all the hiring and firing, that it was creating a patronage sort of higher environment. And I thought, well, geez, that seems kind of counterintuitive. I mean, you would think the exact opposite is true. In fact, I could have probably pointed to specific examples where that was true in my experience in this particular municipality. So it really is kind of we have to rebuild that understanding a little bit. And it's hard when we're in a profession that doesn't necessarily like to advocate strongly for that form of government, or is in that position where advocacy becomes a bit of a challenge because of all of our ethical and professional obligations to stay neutral.
Let's stay on that point. I agree with a lot of what you're saying. What I say to elected officials is, if you're concerned that the CAO may make poor hiring or termination decisions, you need to manage the CAO, right?
Definitely.
Like the answer isn't like take authority away from them. The answer is like get comfortable either with that CAO or new CAO as the case may be necessary, and the decisions that they make, right? Because if they're making bad personnel decisions, there's a very good chance they're making bad decisions somewhere else. So that's something to think about. So let's go back to the HR directors in small towns where the three of us have worked at different stages in our career. You can't have a huge bench of department directors. It's just not reality. What I've seen, and actually the majority of communities I've worked in, is that HR director is split with another department, typically finance. And I see that a lot. And so even here in my current situation, trying to convince my board and now the community that we need our own standalone HR department, the question becomes, why? We've never had one before. Can it be shared with another department director? Can't the manager do that work? What's the point here? Are we just getting after employees? Of course, we know it's more complicated, more nuanced than that. My answer as to why in a larger, more complicated environment, it can't be split with another department director is it's a completely different skill set, right? Absolutely no shade to our, listeners who are maybe performing that split role. If you're a finance professional who understands financial strategy and how to do the world, and you're assigned HR, you're learning a completely different skill set. If you're an HR director and you're being asked to oversee kind of the financial infrastructure of your community, like same thing. And so I think it winds up being bent one way or the other, and one of the areas maybe isn't as strongly advocated for and managed the way that it should be. And that's coming from someone who's made those decisions because of the size of community I had, the size of budget I had, where I knew that I couldn't hire all the people I wanted. And so I started combining roles, but I saw the trade-offs happening in real time.
How large is Middletown, Eden?
I have
Number of department heads, number of employees.
130 employees, 4 collective bargaining units.
Yeah.
I had 7 in Norristown. Norristown has 7 collective bargaining units, including the crossing guards had their own union. That was always the fun one.
It's tough because we have board members that have in most cases, particularly smaller municipalities, they have professional lives. They work in private industry or for various organizations. A lot of what I've heard is, well, I work for this company or that company, and we don't have an HR person. So why would you need one? There's a misunderstanding there that because it is true in this case, it ought to be true in yours as well. It doesn't appreciate the complexity of human resource law, particularly as it pertains to public sector, public organizations, collective bargaining, grievance, all the stuff that we have to deal with on a daily basis. And it's an opportunity to educate, but it's an uphill battle.
And let me add to that, we're talking about the need to have an HR director, right? But there's also the lost opportunity if you don't have one. We're talking about daily operations like insurance coverage and hiring and firing and all that stuff. But, we have in Lower Merion a pretty extensive HR team. We actually just expanded it with another full-time person this year. So they're at 6, including the HR director. We have almost 500 full-time employees. So it's constantly rotating door.
Happening.
We always have hires. So if you're interested, always look at Lower Merion. I guarantee there will be at least 1 or 2 jobs posted on any given day.
I think I know for a fact we have young listeners who are in undergrad, who are in grad, who want to break into this field. If you're not sure of the role that you're looking for, getting into a larger organization that's kind of complex with different opportunities where you can move around like Lower Merion is a good way to start.
I encourage them, even if you're not entirely sure, apply anyway. Interview is practice. But going to my original point, now that we have that extra person, what we've seen is that our HR department is able to do more beyond. Like one of the themes that we've talked about in our previous episodes is going beyond the conventional expectation of what a department or a township does. And what our HR department has done is really kind of gone home with the education of our employees and wellness efforts, like getting the word out and really educating our employees about their benefits. Unless you're looking for something, the average employee is not looking at their benefit package on a daily basis. They're not going to know the nuances. You know who's going to know the nuances? The HR department.
Yep.
That's what they do every single day. Our HR department has gone into that wellness category, particularly mental health and mental wellness, able to dedicate time to that.
The challenge is, I think, helping our boards and the community understand the value there. Organizations and people and benefits and insurances, workplace injuries, all these things are complicated and someone has to manage them. So I do want to shift gears here. And thus,
Dave, I think another challenge is that, this is not a service providing department like planning or police or whatever. It's a little bit more esoteric. It's a little bit more difficult to wrap your head because they're not giving a service to the community as some of the other departments are. And that makes it a struggle to sell that.
I refer to it as the behind the curtain department.
So what I call it is an internal service department. The internal service department's IT, HR, finance, township management, PIO. Their job is to serve all employees. Their responsibility is to do the things that the employees need and that the departments need so that the departments can focus on their service delivery, which is external, right? I don't need my chief of police wondering about insurances or benefits or any of that kind of stuff. I don't want my police officer who's on the street thinking, am I going to get paid next week? Is this going to be covered by my health insurance? There should be somebody that can answer that question so they can be clear-minded in providing their services.
And that's a good case to make if we have any listeners out there who is trying to get a dedicated HR director or department, right? We need to support our employees so that they stay, because it costs more to lose people and have to go through the whole hiring process.
Okay, so let's talk about shaping your team. All of us have transitioned to new governments at one time or another, and we know when that happens, we don't just get to build a new team. We're not bringing people with us. We're not looking at an exodus of department heads or admin employees. You sort of inherit what's there, and you hope you're getting something really good. I think oftentimes that is what's happening. but even something really good may not fit with your style. So how do you guys go about those initial stages of shaping your team? Dave, I'm going to go to you first. What's that initial review process look like, and how do you begin to start shaping to fit your management style?
Yeah, it all starts really right at ground zero with developing, job descriptions, with developing your expectations for your candidate profiles, and of course, feeding into the interview process. I used to place a low premium on culture fit kind of competency in hiring, but the more I go through my career, the more important I think that key strength is really getting a feel for what the individual that's serving on that team is going to bring in terms of the cohesion of the organization as a whole. And it's tricky. It's more art than science. You do have to trust your instinct a little bit. And there's a reason we're in the positions that we are to assemble these teams, because we've presumably exercised good judgment in the past and trust our social intelligence to find those good fits on the team. And the other struggle is that it's been a thin labor force over the last few years. We as managers and those that are in charge of hiring need to be able to find those diamonds in the rough. What can be developed? They're not going to come at you shovel ready. You need to be able to dig a little bit deeper, find those skills and attributes that you can cultivate and grow and adapt to whatever your team needs are.
I agree with everything you said about culture, but just to get back to the beginning part of what you said, in the early days of taking a new role, are you looking at job descriptions? Are you rewriting them early? Is that what you meant?
I think you should be looking at your job descriptions every time you have a vacancy that you're looking to fill, particularly for critical leadership team members. It's true all the way through your organization, but certainly for department heads and management level positions. There's no time where you should have a vacancy that you're not dusting off the job spec or the job description.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I thought that you were saying that in the early days, as you're getting to understand the organization, the team, you started with job descriptions. And I was going to say, I don't do that. I talk to the people, not the job description.
I think what I meant by that is the premium placed on job fit. I had a guy who was sitting in an interview on a public works department, and it was the road crew member we were looking to hire. I was with my road superintendent interviewing, and he said, "Do you like to hunt or fish?" This is the superintendent to the candidate. And afterward, I said, "Well, what'd you ask that for? It's got nothing to do with the job. There's no value. Well, the guys on the crew, they like to hunt and fish. And if I'm hiring somebody, I like to know that they have kind of similar interests. The training that we get and go through as managers, we kind of recoil at something like that. But if you peel back a layer of it, you start to understand it. Maybe they don't have to hunt or fish, but they definitely do need to have that cultural symbionts with the rest of the team really will make it for a more productive work environment. I found that to be true the more I've got involved in the hiring process as my career progressed than originally I thought it was. I don't know if you guys feel the same way.
How many executive level hires have either of you made?
I would say over 15.
Yeah, close to 20.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting. And I guess to follow up that, have you done a different style of hiring process depending on the position?
Depending on the position and depending on the organization, yeah.
Dave?
I think it's varied a little bit. Of course, you have those roles that you want to be more thorough and more involved in. And then there are some roles that we probably feel more comfortable delegating. Absolutely.
For me, I look at the hiring process in a couple phases. Two of the check marks that I'm looking for, not different than what Dave said. Are they qualified and can they do the job? When you get down to a list of finalists, that question should be answered. You should not be figuring out in your final interview or your final two steps, whatever that's going to be, can this person do the role? Can they perform? The question is, are they going to fit here at the executive level? If you're hiring beneath that,
how are they going to mesh with the team?
Yeah, what's their communication style? What's their work ethic? Is their philosophy? Are they going to be aligned or at least able to become aligned with the vision of the manager or the governing body? What does that look like? I think that's a really important part of the process.
Yeah.
And to me, as a candidate, kind of understanding that, I say in the last interviews with the board of supervisors, I hope by this point, and usually you sort of know the recruiter, so you can have a high degree of confidence, the final candidates you're looking at are qualified. I assume the conversation we're not going to have today is whether or not I'm qualified to be your next manager. I think the conversation becomes, do you want to work with me and do I want to work with you? And I'm really interested in having conversations about what that looks like and what your expectations are of your manager and what my expectations are of you, and if those things are aligned.
Speaking of expectations, since I've only been here for about 2.5 years, I've already been involved in 3 executive searches: IT, finance, and chief of police. All three have been phenomenal. 2 external hires, 1 internal hire. With the chief of police talking about expectations, because it is such a unique position, not better or any of that, but because it is such a integrated into the community position, right? Because having a chief of police, like we said earlier, can make your life a lot easier or a lot harder. Lower Merion, we actually engaged focus groups with our community, right? What do you want to see in your next police chief? We had Lower Merion is the land of civics. We have 14 civic associations. So we kind of selectively picked a bunch of focus groups representing the civics, the religious community, the minority community,
Leaf blow.
students. We also have a ton of universities and higher education institutions, so we tried to get a representative there. Just in terms of a focus group, what are major police public safety issues that you see, and what kind of virtues would you like to see in your next chief of police? When we actually went to the hiring process, you'll remember, Eden, Lower Merion tends to do like a grand panel. We had about 12 folks on the panel. Myself, the HR director, the manager. We had 2 members of our elected body. We had 2 members of the FOP. That was a conversation with our elected officials and board officers on that one. We wanted the FOP to feel confident. The previous chief of police had a no confidence vote. We wanted to ensure that the FOP was in on the ground floor of the hiring process. They weren't involved in every single step, but when we had it down to 5 finalists, they were part of the interview panel, as well as our department heads. We had finance and our fire chief, EMS and all that stuff, trying to get involved. I'll also say for executive searches, I'm fine with some of the preliminary being virtual, especially if they're out of state. But at one point, you need to have them in person to interview. Because we had one candidate who could do the job, resume was great, checked all the boxes in terms of qualifications, but we got them in person in front of the grand jury, so to speak. And I've never seen stock plummet as quickly as that individual who just couldn't
Take the heat.
He couldn't take the heat.
Command the
couldn't
room.
cross the finish line.
All right. So Brandon, I want to give you a chance at the question too. And I'm not putting you on the spot, but you are the number 2 in your organization, right?
Yes.
Where Dave and I are managers. When we think about shaping our team, inheriting what's there and how we might shift, our perspective is going to be different than you. So I really want to put the spotlight on you for a second. So as the number 2, what does shaping your team look like? And how does that work with the dynamic of the manager who really is in charge of shaping that team? Tell us more about that.
I would say I'm lucky enough to be in a unique situation that a lot of my peers in other communities don't enjoy. Anything the manager's involved in, I'm involved in. We are like 2 peas in a pod, the Laurel Hardy duo, right? So
That's right.
we're often involved. The door you see behind me.
Yeah, that's a window. Don't go out that.
there
Don't
you
go out
go.
that. There's
There you go. That door, right? It's not my main door. That's my door straight into the manager's office. I call it my bat door. We'll just chat every day, have informal conversations. I'm the one that tends to get out of the manager's suite, the second floor, and actually go into the departments and get a pulse of how departments are working. So when we were doing the 3 hires or the executives, I spent a lot of time in their departments before we knew we were hiring, to get a sense of how things were working and touching base with the departments. When it comes to actually looking for and building a team, no one's going to have all the technical knowledge and abilities, right? Especially if they're coming from outside of the township. We are so large and do so much. There's no way they're going to understand every single thing we do to a great depth. For me, it's more about that fit. Are they experienced? Are they qualified? Yes. But for me, I've been in previous communities, I've seen people who are exceptional, like pedigrees, out the door, but you put them in a department, can't handle it, or just doesn't integrate well with the team. That is far more damaging, not only for the township, but for the departments and the employees in that department as well.
That's that culture fit.
Guys, sometimes you go into organizations and you're told, great organization, incredible people, dedicated public servants operating on a high level, and you get there and your perspective is different.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, there's also, what people don't see that's going on in the department, right? Like, I'll tell you, when I go to a new municipality, and I spent a good chunk of my initial first months in Lower Merion here just quietly observing, not commenting and just watching.
I find that so hard to do.
Me too.
I try to do the same thing, and I always tell myself, I'm not going to comment. I'm just going to observe. And I just wind up speaking my mind,
It's harder to do than you
professionally,
realize.
but it's a great skill set. And I admire those who have the discipline to be able to do that.
I jot down notes. I usually carry a little notebook.
I'm a moleskin notebook girly. I carry mine around everywhere.
I'll jot whenever I want to open my mouth. I'll just jot it down and get it out my system that way.
Yeah, maybe I should try that. I'm too quick to sort of have a comment sometimes. So let me ask you this, Dave. I'll put you on the hot seat here. What does the phrase "a new broom sweeps clean" mean to you? And how does that relate to how you approach this job?
I'm glad you asked that, because I was just thinking as we're having our conversation, and I'd be curious to get your perspective on this, Eden. When you're bringing somebody in, particularly a management level or a leadership team member, is there something that gives you a nudge one way or the other, internal promotion versus external hire? When I think a new broom sweeps clean, that's what it brings to mind. Typically, the way I try to assess that is, do I think that the department, the service provision they're giving, their interaction with residents, so I think that's moving in the right direction. Generally, it's aligned with the mission, vision, values. It's needs to be supported and sustained. So in those situations where I think that things are going pretty smoothly in those categories, I'm more inclined to be that internal hire guy, that promoter, because I want to show to the staff that this is an opportunity for growth. Let's be honest, even in our bigger municipalities, there's oftentimes not a whole lot of room to grow professionally. That's where you see a lot of people jumping from one place to another. We're not organizations of 1,000 plus that have hierarchies a mile long that we can bring people up through the professional development ladder. In my opinion, we should grow from within.
That's a hot take.
Mhm.
I hope the listeners were paying attention there, Dave. That is something that has been hotly debated for a long time, and I'm going to jump in on the debate. My belief, when you have an internal candidate, I always say the same thing. I am rooting for them, right? I hope that the organization did right by them, gave them enough experience, continuing education, enough formal education if necessary, enough mentorship where they are ready to take that step and take that role. The other side of that is that the candidate did all the necessary things to receive all of that where they are ready. I am not willing to assume that is the case. The only way to test that is to do a process, to do a search, to bring in external candidates. Organizations do not always like that. People do not always like that. But I want to do a formal search, either with a recruiter or an HR department, depending on the situation, the role, and test the market. You have no idea what's out there. And if you are a competitive workplace, maybe you live in a competitive environment where people want to work, maybe you can poach from other municipalities, you have no idea who is going to walk through that door and present themselves either to the management team, the board of supervisors, and what they may say. You don't know what their experiences are, how their organizations have prepared them, what they've done to prepare themselves. The only way you can know you're hiring the best and brightest, which is what we're going for in these roles, is to see what's out there. And the way to do that is the process.
Right.
It's challenging.
Yeah. When you
It's
see an
challenging to the
internal,
candidate, it's challenging to the organization, but I think you owe it. At the end of the day, you owe it to the taxpayers to make sure we're bringing the right people into these roles who are going to cultivate success for a long time.
when you see an internal candidate who stands out above the external candidates and they end up getting that promotion, not only does it create a boost of organizational morale that
It's
is
celebratory.
immeasurable, but it's just the absolute, you could see this, the sky opens up and the birds are chirping and everything's humming, and it really sets that candidate up for success. I mean, the challenge on the new room sweeps clean metaphor is, you bring in somebody externally to be that proverbial bull in the china shop because maybe it's needed. Maybe that organization or that department needs a shot in the arm, needs to go in a different direction. That's challenging to put yourself in that candidate's shoes.
Oh, it's super challenging.
It's very difficult. Now you're coming in, you got to build your credibility, you got to build your rapport with the team. And you also have to do it through the lens knowing that you got to take this in a different direction. You don't have the luxury of being that passive observer. I agree with Brandon, that's got a lot of value, but in some cases you just can't do it.
Yep. My approach or that approach isn't for everyone, right? Lower Merion is large enough that I have the ability to do that. Others don't. They don't have the time. I've lived a little bit through this here in Lower Merion. My predecessor and I are complete polar opposites. That is a quote from someone on my staff. Not saying that my predecessor did anything wrong. It's just what you bring to the position.
Sure.
right? My style is going to be different from your style, Eden, although I think we have some similarities, or you, Dave. We all bring something different to the table. So when I started going down into the departments, my predecessor didn't do that. It was kind of comical in the first month when I started walking through departments. Like, my department heads knew it, but the rank and file didn't. So when they saw me walking through, they thought, oh, crap, principal's in the room. Who's in trouble? What's going on?
Yeah.
Like, oh, who are you here to talk to? I'm not here to talk to anyone. I'm just here to say hi. It blew their minds. But I've had people say that they appreciate seeing management in the departments, just taking the pulse.
Yeah, I think that's important. You have to be out there and be visible and be available. I think people are looking for that from their leadership. When I am building culture, when I'm redefining culture, when I'm hiring, I have a bias towards doers, right? I like people who want to get in there and do the work, who are motivated,
Okay.
who are workhorses, who want to make things happen. But you can't have an entire team full of doers. You also need people who are thinkers, people who will pause, take a step back, try to see the forest
Yep.
through the trees. If you show up to a job site and everyone just jumps in and no one's organizing all of that, that becomes a problem too. Thoughts, reactions?
I had a saying in my first municipal job ever. It's so much easier to tell a department head to pump the brakes than try to motivate them to push them forward.
Totally agree.
Right? Like, you
Yeah.
could say, cool down, slow down, and this is why. And know that at some point you can release the linchpin and let them off to the races. It is just so much harder if you get a department head that is either not motivated or kind of just does their thing. They do their job, they go home, they don't go above and beyond or excel. And it's so much harder to motivate and push them to do more.
I've seen department heads who are in their role because they can do every job in their department. And then they say, I just want to do the job. I want to help them do the job. But the managing people part, the managing the department, that's totally different. Just tell me what to do. That's a tough situation. Maybe our listeners have figured out exactly how to deal with that, right? Because now you have somebody in a role who has a lot of expertise, a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge, but we're asking them to perform new tricks, right? That's tough. It's mentorship, training, continuing education, development, all that kind of stuff. It goes back to your hiring process of just because they've done everything right to get into the role that they're in doesn't mean they're ready to be in the role that they're in. That's tough. And I think in there also is that process where they are needing to transition from being the doer to being the thinker.
Mm-hmm.
That's tough too.
Yeah,
Yeah, go
definitely.
ahead.
I mean, that's a seismic shift in how we have to think about building our leadership teams in our organization, because historically it's always been, I crank out the most widgets, so now I should be able to supervise the widget makers. That's just not the reality. And it's like you said, Eden, you've got thinkers, doers, and dreamers in your organization, and you need to sometimes wear all hats at the same time. You need people that are able to analyze processes, execute, and you need people that are going to be able to innovate, that are going to be able to push the envelope. And trying to find the right fit for that oftentimes doesn't mean that it's congruent with the ability to do the job, the ability to execute, the ability to know where all the nuts and bolts are of your department or your organization. It requires a deeper dive than that, and that's where the struggle is.
Yeah, Dave, I totally agree. I'm not sure I could have said it better myself. Let me ask you this question. How do you work with a team that has a depth of experience, all the doers who really know their stuff well, and you hire somebody who maybe is the thinker, the dreamer, the innovator, who understands that stuff well enough, but isn't the expert and hasn't done all of those roles? I think it happens all the time, right? Gone are the days where hiring managers, the person in the organization the longest, they've served in the most departments, they know, the details of how everything runs, and then they become the manager. Well, now we're seeing that management is its own skill set, that we're looking for municipal government experience, but maybe not someone who's an expert in every discipline in the municipality, right? There are municipalities across this country where the manager is the former chief of police. How do you work with the rank and file to say this person is going to be a good leader, even though they aren't an expert at everything that you guys do? How do you facilitate that conversation?
I think that's an important note. A lot of what we've been talking to right now this morning has been, prior to the arrival of the department head. For listeners and for us, it's almost equally, if not more important than getting the right person in the door. The job doesn't start after they get that conditional offer and they sign off. What we do here in Lower Merion, between the manager and I, we provide a constant source of support with regular check-ins, particularly with the new ones, especially if they're new to executive level leadership. That one internal hire I was referencing was an internal candidate, never was a department head, not really a frontline supervisor, kind of what you were saying, Eden, didn't have that really, they could do the job, they know inside out, but doesn't necessarily have the management experience. That person ultimately got the job because we thought they would fit. They had the knowledge and qualifications, but you need to consistently meet with that department head and also meet with the employees, right? That one in particular there were multiple internal candidates, so some people didn't get it. How you deliver the message to those internals who didn't get it is crucial. We meet with our departments before the hire comes on board usually and says, hey, this is the new person. This is their background. We think it's going to be a great thing. We encourage you to get to know this person. And when the department head comes in, we usually have another intro meeting like, hey, here's Dave. He's been hired to be your department head. And we really spend a good half a day, full day, just integrating them into the team.
Yeah, I think a lot of that relationship building has to happen organically, particularly with your leadership team. The old saying, you can lead a horse to water, you can't make them drink it. When you're trying to build that cohesive unit, you need to have high expectations of those individuals. Put them in positions where they can be successful, get those early wins, but also put them in positions that push their comfort level a little bit and know what questions to ask. Is to be the smartest person in the room. We're not the jacks of all trades and Janes of all trades, the masters of none, but we need to know what questions to ask, and we need to know how to put people in situations where they can be successful, where they can show off their strengths, and where they could build on some of the skill sets that they need to grow into.
How do you know when you're in an organization if you need an assistant, a deputy, a number two? What does that look like? Have either of you been in a situation where you are the number two, the assistant or deputy, you become the manager and you say, I don't need that number two role. Maybe you create another department head or an office or a chief role. One of my friends is a chief equity officer, but the role is different. Have you been in those situations? How do you do that analysis? What does that look like? Talk to me. Dave, go ahead.
I'm kind of in that situation right now. Small borough, small but mighty. It's a small organization, small budget, about $3 million, about 30 employees, has for 30 years had a borough manager and an assistant borough manager. It's probably more in the realm of assistant to the manager.
An assistant and an assistant to the?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Not right now because they both
Okay.
retired. Before I started as interim here, that was the setup. It wasn't like the traditional, okay, the assistant is in charge of these departments and the manager's in charge of these. I really do think that the calculus is as simple as what is your locus of control as a manager? If you've got 30 departments, it's unrealistic to expect that you can do them, that those department heads a service and manage that whole team as a single man or woman in charge of the municipality. If you've got 5, that's different. So I think it really is just a matter of looking at the organization top to bottom, the organizational chart, and trying to limit the number of individuals reporting up through the chain of command and making your best judgment using those facts to guide you.
Have you ever been in a situation where you're looking at your number two going, I'm glad to have you, but I don't really need you?
No, I don't think so. I've always gotten a lot out of the relationship with the assistant manager. When I was in Susquehanna Township, the assistant manager was also the director of planning. So you had that dual hat role. I took that as an opportunity, and I think we all should be taking those opportunities to grow that assistant manager into a position where maybe maybe they don't want to be a manager. Maybe they're, more than comfortable in the roles they're in, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
There are number twos out there who are career number twos, and they're excellent at it. No desire to be the manager.
For sure.
And this profession needs them.
But giving those individuals opportunities at least to get exposure to the sides of what we do that they may have historically not had a seat at the table, I think that's incumbent on all of us. And it gives us fresh perspective and new ideas to bring into the fold and to consider. So I don't think I've ever had that situation where I thought, geez, I've had a lot of times where I've thought, man, I'd really love for this guy or this gal to be the assistant manager. I think they've got such management potential. And I'll approach them. Hey, is this a career track you're interested in? And can I give you some exposure to the other sides of this profession that you may not have had a lot of experience with?
Sure.
I've had that happen to me post-departure. I left Springfield for Lower Merion, and the assistant manager position was merged with the finance directors.
How'd that make you feel? Do you feel weird by that?
Yeah. To be honest, a little bit, right? Having been the assistant manager, Springfield was interesting. They used the assistant 2 as a stepping stone, like a probationary period. So I started as assistant 2, then went to assistant. It was a weird feel, right? I felt I had enough on my plate to have a dedicated position. Honestly, agree to disagree. I think there was enough from a project management and HR side with the hiring and all that to have a dedicated person.
They just started doing less, Brandon. Don't take the ego hit.
Well, it was more of a financial aspect, right?
Yeah, tough decision.
They took the finance director and merged it with the assistant and hired another finance person, the finance coordinator position, because that's where the need was, right? It made me feel a little weird, but I understood the logic.
Yeah.
And I didn't dispute the logic in that.
And at the end of the day, when you're no longer in the organization, not that you can't have an opinion, but it's not really up to you anymore, right? I mean, the decisions get made, organizations move on. I am not of the belief that our entire personality should be the jobs that we have. I know you both on a personal level. I mean, you guys are great people with lives and families and hobbies and interests. You just happen to be dedicated public servants working in local government. I tell people, don't get so wrapped up in the roles that you have, especially in the places that you were and no longer are. Brandon, did you want to give a reaction? Assistants, deputies, when are they needed? When are they not? How does that work?
Depends on the size of the organization and the need. I could not imagine Lower Merion as large as much as we do with so many people and so many department heads not having an assistant. There are some smaller boroughs that don't necessarily need one. From a professional standpoint, I like and support having one just as a redundancy. If the manager is incapacitated, who makes the call?
Okay. I think that's a great place to end. I think our staff is important. Shaping your teams are super important. Understanding the culture, which Dave brought up earlier, and how you might want to redefine that is super important. We heard the phrase earlier, thinkers, dreamers, doers, innovators. Last question. Guys, what are you? Are you a dreamer? Are you a doer? Are you a thinker? Dave?
I like to think I'm a thinker. How's that?
Okay. That's pretty good. Brandon?
I'm a doer. I think and I innovate, but at the end of the day, I'll get things done.
Gotcha. I'm a dreamer. I'm a dreamer with a doer on the side.
We get them all.
Welcome back to
We got all three.
A mean
You
team.
got it.
We should start
Welcome
a
back to Generation on the Rise, where we go there. Really happy to be here with my great friends, Dave and Brandon, where we talk about all things local government, Pennsylvania and across the country. We have different topics every week where we go there. Tune in. If you haven't listened and subscribed, please do that. Super fun when the episode pops up on your phone where you know, hey, another week where we're going to go there. Until next time, thank you very much.